Please be seated. Well, apparently we've got things worked out, so let's try this.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Detective Khan. Could you please state your full name, spelling first and last?
Detective Sergeant Randy Khan, spelled K-H-A-N.
And how are you employed?
Department of Michigan State Police.
And what's your current role with the MSP?
I'm a detective sergeant in the Technical Service Unit, or TSU for short.
And do you have a particular expertise with respect to your division, your unit?
I do. There's 6 of us in the unit throughout the state of Michigan. We're all assigned a geographical area. I cover the 3rd district, which encompasses 14 counties. So I'm responsible to assist any law enforcement agency in a technical aspect of an investigation. So we use technology to further an investigation. Typically what we do is whether we install cameras for an investigation, hidden microphones, GPS tracker units, but cell phone technology is what probably encompasses about 75 to 85% of my time. That would be both historical cell phone records, analysis, mapping, and plotting, or also real time, say if there was a missing person, a wanted fugitive, or an endangered person, or a suicidal person, using live cell phone records from the cell phone carriers to assist in locating them.
Right. So as far as the specific titles of the areas of your, I guess, expertise, what are those?
Cell phone technology, cell phone analysis, mapping and plotting, or geolocation.
All right, thank you. And do you have specific training and experience relative to those areas?
I do. I've been in the unit for almost 8 years now. And with that position, not only do I have on-the-job training, but I've been to formal training. So I have been through training to 10 other states now across the country, because it is specialized training, not available here locally, typically in Michigan. So a lot of the training courses I do have to go out of state. I was just recently in Colorado for a week earlier this month for cell phone training and analysis for a subject matter expert through a company called ZX. I've also been to Indiana State Police Headquarters for another training by the same company for mapping, analysis, and plotting. I've been to training in Utah, California, Florida, Virginia, numerous things here in Michigan, both online and then also in person. Been to Texas, a few other states, but again, because it's specialized, it's just not something that most law enforcement, detectives are going to get. You have to go somewhere to get this training. So I have hundreds of formal hours of training and then thousands of on-the-job training. I also do 90 cases a year on average. And within those cases, I do about 200 sets of phone records a year. And then with each set of phone records, there can be up to 5 different types of technology. So it's not just one phone number, one set of records. Sometimes there's up to 5 different types of records for a specific number.
All right. So then all that training that would encompass cell phone technology, cell phone records and analysis, and mapping and plotting?
Yes, I've actually been through training from a Sprint senior RF engineer through T-Mobile engineer, and some training from various other law enforcement agencies and also other engineers who have worked in the cell phone industry.
Your Honor, the people at this time would move to qualify Detective Khan as an expert in cell phone technology, cell phone records and analysis, and mapping and plotting.
Mr. O'Farrell.
So stipulated, Your Honor.
You will be so recognized.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, if we can, Detective Khan, could you just give the jury an explanation of how cell phones work?
I can. I will give a verbal explanation. I also do have a PowerPoint that will help visualize some of the stuff that we're going to talk about here. If you'd like, I can proceed to the first slide where I'm going to start talking about the cell phone technology. Why don't we talk about it first before we show any slides?
Yeah, why don't you go skip over your first slide is with respect to the districts. Skip over that and let's just go on to cell phone technology.
Sure. So real easy, simplistic explanation. Cell phones work just like a regular landline phone that we all had probably when we grew up. The only difference is the first leg or the last leg or the first and last leg of that communication of that phone is done via radio waves. So the radio waves will go, in other words, the signal will go from your phone up to a cell site, which most people call a cell tower, but the proper name is a cell site. Then the signal is going to hit a receiver. It's going to go down on a set of wires. It's going to go to a computer through some switching gears. Then it's going to use the same lines, the copper, the fiber, the cable, the internet lines, whatever lines it are, it's going to travel just like your regular landline phone would to its destination. If its destination was here to the Horizon Conference Center, then it would go through the copper lines and come to the office here, or if they had a internet phone through Charter, then it would go over the VoIP system. But either way, it's just like a regular landline phone. The difference is that first and last leg is done via radio waves. If you were calling another cell phone, instead of coming here, it would route up to that person's closest cell tower, or I shouldn't say closest, it would route up to a cell tower, and then the signal would go out to their phone.
All right. And is there more you need to discuss as far as the cell sites?
So cell sites, again, there are 3 major carriers now in the US, there used to be 4, but each major carrier designs their cell system or cell sites and locations to provide coverage for all their customers. The last thing you want is a customer to lose or drop a call. You'll be unhappy with them and want to go to a different carrier. So within each cell site, they're divided up to sides or sectors. The most common is specifically here for Sprint that we're going to talk about back there in this time period was a 3-sided or 3-sector cell site. Now a cell site could have as many as 6 sides or sectors. It could have as few as 2. And there also are cell sites that are called omnidirectional, which would send a signal out, radiate out 360 degrees. In other words, cover all the areas surrounding that cell site. But especially during this time, and in this case, when we're talking about Sprint, it's typically, for this case, in this time period, a 3-sided or 3-sector tower. So they divide it up into sectors. Each sector has a different transmitting frequency, and then each sector has a specific amount of available channels. So when law enforcement sends a subpoena or search warrant to the phone carrier to get the records, one of the things they provide to us is what cell site or tower was accessed, and then more specifically, what side or sector was accessed by that cell phone to complete that communication.
And then Detective, you have a slide that shows what you're talking about as far as the 3-sector layout. Are you able to skip ahead to that?
I am. So this right here would be kind of if you were up in a hot air balloon looking straight down or up in outer space looking down, this is a monopole structure. Up here would be the top angle iron. So this is looking down on top. Here's the pole. There's metal brackets going out. And so it looks like a triangle here. These little squares here represent the transmitters and receivers on the 3 different sides. This would be a representative of Sector 1, Sector 2, Sector 3. If I skip to the next slide, one of the things they provide us is the directionality of these transmitters. They're directional transmitters, and they tell us what the direction that transmitter, that antenna is aimed at. So if they said the azimuth is 0 degrees, that would be pointing this blue arrow to true north. If this one was at 120, it would be pointing down here at about 430 on a clock dial. If this one was at 240 degrees, we point at 7 or 730. So this is all stuff provided by a cell phone provider. If we put that over top, those arrows, so you can kind of see that there's 3 sides or sectors. And these dark black lines here would be known as the sector boundaries. And that's kind of the area where the signals start a little bit of overlapping each other. What we don't want is us as a cell phone user to be able to move around and all of a sudden drop a call. So there is what they call overlapping area, not only between sectors, but then also from opposing cell sites or cell towers. So that's one of the things as far as what it shows there as far as those sectors. The next thing to kind of talk about real quick is just the antennas are aimed down at the ground. It's called down tilt or beam tilt. They do this both mechanically by aiming it down, but they also do it electronically by aiming it to a geographical area where their customers are, their cell phone users. The reason for this is we inhabit the earth, that's where our phones are at. We're not way up in the sky. They also don't want their signals just to go out forever, on and on and on, to where they're going to interfere with other signals. Each carrier only has certain frequencies to use, and then they have to reuse that frequency at a very nearby 1 or 2 towers away. So it's called a frequency reuse pattern. So the easy way to think about this in your mind is if you ever listen to a radio station and say you're listening to 100.5 and you're driving from one city and you drive to another city, and that city has the same radio station, 100.5, but it's a different station, same frequency. All of a sudden, when you start getting in between them, you start hearing 2 stations. That's called noise. You can't understand either one. It's static. It's no good. Therefore, the cell phone carriers aim their signal down at the ground to cover a geographical area where we're at, so you don't run into that noise issue with the frequency reuse pattern.
And so you're talking about 2 different cell towers, for instance, and you could get a connection from one phone to the 2 cell phone towers. Is that along the same lines of what you're saying?
So your cell phone is going to connect up with a cell site or cell tower. When you first make a communication, your phone decides which tower it has the best clearest signal to. Then throughout the duration of your communication, the cell phone network will decide, do I need to hand you off or move you over to another cell site because you have a clearer, better signal? Typically, it's because you're moving and you're getting closer to that, but there can be some other factors in there of why you might be handed off to another cell site.
Okay. But the tilt you're talking about avoids, again, or attempts to avoid one cell phone getting reception from two different towers.
Actually, it's not from one cell phone getting connected to two different towers. It avoids from the two different towers competing over the same frequency and causing that noise. In other words, it would make the system not work properly is what that actually does.
Okay. But just to clarify then, so the same cell phone could be connecting, for lack of a better word, to two different towers at the same time. Is that possible?
Your cell phone's not going to connect to two different towers at the same, I guess let's rephrase it. A cell phone's not going to utilize two different towers at the same time. It's going to utilize the tower that has the clearest best signal for that communication. But we got to talk about the types of communication. If it's a phone call, you're going to be connected for a much longer duration as opposed to sending a text, which is just a quick blip, a quick, data transmission. So you can actually use two different towers very near each other or multiple towers. So for instance, if we were doing data transmission and doing LTE, you could be getting data sent to you from multiple towers at the same time. But if you're making a phone call, you're only going to be utilizing one cell site or one tower at a time.
Okay. And so LTE would be like text messaging data. Is that what you're talking about?
Data, long-term evolution is what LTE stands for. It's part of when they did the 4G, 2G, 3G, 4G. That was for faster data transmission, faster internet usage. And so there's a thing called carrier aggregation where you can use multiple towers to download quicker to you. But again, that's for data, not specifically for phone calls.
And a phone call would just be one tower.
Voice phone calls, you're utilizing one cell site.
All right. Now, if we can skip ahead, you have a map of the cell towers in Lower Michigan in the mitten.
This would be the Sprint cell sites for Lower Michigan for the time period of January 2018. So as you notice, there's a cluster of orange. So each circle represents a cell site, does not represent at all the coverage of the cell site, only that there's a cell site or cell tower in that area. So of course, Metro Detroit being the largest population area of the state of Michigan, there's the most cell sites for that time. If you go over to Grand Rapids, the next largest cluster, here's the Lansing area. You can go down to the Ann Arbor area where my arrow is. Flint is just north of Detroit.
Sorry to interrupt you, Detective. If you want to point something out, you can use the laser pointer.
Oh.
I don't think it comes up when you use the mouse.
Come up. Okay. It's just that I was saying, you can see the Metro Detroit area. There's larger clusters and larger circles, or larger cluster of those orange circles, representing a more dense population, more need for more cell sites or more cell towers.
All right. And then you also have a map with the cell towers that are located in the greater Saginaw area.
I do. So this would be, again, I labeled it the greater Saginaw area. It does encompass the city of Saginaw, but it also goes to the west, out towards the Hemlock area. To the north, it covers Freeland. And then to the east or to the right, you got Reese. And then down in the bottom right corner, you would have Frankenwood. So you can kind of see in the Saginaw area, higher densely populated area, there are more cell sites, more orange circled. And as we get further away, more of the rural, more of the country area, less cell sites. So there they would use a different frequency and they would use a usually more wattage, more power to send the signal out further because they have less users, but a bigger geographical area.
And then there's a couple of addresses that you have listed on that map. And maybe if it would be helpful, just use a laser pointer here and point out which addresses you have.
I'll stand up here. So right here in the center, that is the actual scene. So that is listed as the 522 South Bond Street. And then the other address listed down here, again, there's a push pin and the address is listed. So the push pin has a color, it's orange or a red head, and then there's a needle that goes down into the map. Where the needle goes in the map is the actual address. So the second address we have listed there is the address at 4781 South Washington Road, and that's in Bridgeport Township.
Okay. And those were addresses you were given that are associated with this case?
They are, correct.
Okay. And then your next slide, you have a satellite view.
This is just to kind of give a visual representation where we talked about the densely populated areas. So again, with Saginaw, you have more streets, more roads, but when you start looking out here, the rural areas where the farm fields are, the Shiawassee National Refuge. So a lot less population, a lot less people. So therefore, there's a lot less cell towers out in this area, as opposed to this area up here where we have a cell site here, 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 cell site here, cell site here, cell site here. Then they start kind of spreading out. There's one here, and down here, but big geographical area because it's farmland, not a lot of people, not a lot of need for available channels.
All right. And then your next slide, you zoomed on in to the area surrounding the homicide scene. And you actually have some distances with respect to the towers that are close to it. Can you just discuss that to the jury?
Correct. So again, the orange push pin on the map represents the 522 southbound. That is the scene. And then to the lower left of that, there's an orange circle, and that is Sprint cell site 1821. And that's approximately 0.90 miles to the homicide scene. In other words, 9/10 of a mile. And then over to the right, there is another Sprint cell site, and that is Sprint cell site 1832. Again, another cell site that we'll talk about a little more throughout this PowerPoint, but that's the second closest Sprint cell site to the scene, and it's 1.57 miles away.
All right. And now just to go back to this and clarify and give this as an example. So you have two different cell sites in the area of the homicide scene. So you referred to CDR data previously. Is it that call data?
Call detail records. CDRs are call detail records.
Okay.
And
So just to get to that, with respect to a cell phone that's in that area, can it hit off of both of the towers on a phone call?
So on a voice phone call, you're going to utilize one cell site at a time. And then you could be transferred or moved from cell site to cell site as you move around, but you're going to utilize a cell site at a time for our Sprint phone call or voice call.
So somebody crossing the bridge over from the eastern side of Saginaw to the western side, they might move from 1832 to 1821. Is that correct?
They could, yes.
Okay, on a call.
Correct.
All right. And then just to clarify, so that the LTE data you discussed, that would be, again, data from like the internet someone's going to on their cell phone, or text messaging or things like that. Is that correct?
It can be various things, whether it's you're looking on the internet, weather channel, push notifications, YouTube. It's using the internet using data. So data is going to come in packets. It's going to come and burst to your phone.
All right. So someone who's located at 522 South Bond Street, is that an area where you can get that phone to connect with both 1832 and 1821?
Sprint cell site 1832 and these two specific cell sites, 1821 and 1832, are the two closest this area. I would expect someone who's a Sprint customer back in the January 2018 time period, because again, we do have overlapping coverage. The cell providers want to make sure that if I move or if one tower has all the channels filled, that I still have available channels that I still can communicate and use my phone. So I would expect someone at or near or in the area of this address, this 522 South Bond, to be able to have coverage from either or both of these cell sites, because they are the two nearest and they're not much difference in distance from that specific address.
Okay. And then, so when we're talking about a cell phone, if you can just clarify, is the cell phone constantly a smartphone, like an Apple, iPhone, whatnot, is that constantly downloading data so that it would be constantly hitting off of those towers?
I can't say everybody's phone. Again, it's going to depend on how your phone is set up and what you have. If you have your phone set up to get push notifications, emails, text messages, weather channel alerts, your favorite YouTube person, you subscribe to YouTube, has a new channel, you might be getting constant push notifications. Again, everybody's phone's set up different of what you want, but your phone is constantly communicating with the network, letting the network know where it's at, and then networks letting the phone know, hey, where the closest cell sites are. So they're always communicating. So if you do get a communication, the network knows where to send it. But each person's phone set up a little different as far as how you utilize it and if it's constantly having communications. But these are Sprint records and they're what we call activity-based, meaning there needs to be activity for us to be able to have to show what cell site was used or utilized. The only thing with Sprint though is text messages do not log what cell site was used. Voice calls do, and the data with the LTE, but text messages on the call detail records do not show or list the cell site utilized because again, it was just a quick short burst of transmission to that cell site.
All right. And so those CDRs and the LTE records, those are in specific phone records that you can get from the cell phone provider. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in this case, were there some phone numbers that you received data for?
I did. I received actually 2 sets of phone records from Sprint. And then there was a third phone number that I received related to the case.
All right. And in your next slide, you indicate those numbers?
I do. At the top of the slide, list my report number, my case number, the TSU-286-18. And then again, I reference the Saginaw PD complaint number, the 18-476. So this is my case related to the case we're here on today. And so there's 3 phone numbers listed up there. I find it best when I do my analysis over the years, when I have multiple phone numbers, that I list a different color for each phone number. So as we go through and we're talking about location, pattern uses, which phone number we're referring to, because sometimes it gets hard to remember a 10-digit phone number. So the first number listed up there and highlighted in blue is for Sprint phone number 989-475-4365. And it's the phone number associated with Davia and Thompson. The second phone number you can see listed in green there is the 989-714-5011. That's associated with the victim, Antonio Parham. I do not have the records for that phone, but it is related to this case. So therefore I did look for it on the other set of records. And then the last phone number listed or highlighted in yellow is a phone number associated with Lisa Curtis, and that is a Sprint service cell phone number, and that's 989-714-7663.
All right. And then your next 2 slides are just some information regarding the certifications that you received.
Correct. The next slide is just a Sprint CDR key. It kind of gives you a breakdown of what's related to the records. And the important thing to note or highlight here in the yellow is it's Sprint because at the time they were located in Kansas City, Missouri. They are in the central time zone. They recorded all text messages in central time. Since we are here in Michigan, we have to add 1 hour to those to show the local time. However, the phone calls Sprint recorded in what would be called the local switch time. So the switch that handled the phone call, the actual voice call, is handled in local switch time. In this case, all the phone calls were on a local switch. So they were all in Eastern time or local Michigan time. And that's just all this sheet highlights. The next thing is the certification that you mentioned. And this is something
actually, sorry to stop you, Detective, but just wanted to clarify that. So in a call log, the time would be an hour off. Is that correct?
For text messages only. For the voice phone calls, so if it says voice, it would be for these records in this specific case, all the ones we're going to talk about were recorded in local switch time, which was our local Michigan Eastern time. But the text messages for Sprint during this time period were recorded in central time. So therefore we have to do a time adjustment. We have to add 1 hour to go from central time to Eastern time.
So I apologize. I got that backwards. So that the call logs time is going to be exactly the same Eastern time, correct?
Correct.
And then in a text message, time is going to be an hour off.
Correct.
All right. And then just to clarify this, so the cell phone records that are found within the phone and a cell phone download as opposed to Sprint's records, would that apply?
Typically, when you do a Celebrate extraction, I used to do Celebrate extractions years ago, but typically they are going to do the time conversion, or it's going to be the local time is what it's going to show. The key will be after the time listed is if it shows UTC +0 or UTC 0, or it shows UTC -4 or -5. This time of the year, when we're talking about this case, which was the winter time, we are 5 hours behind the Greenwich Mean Time or the GMT or the UTC +0. So typically the Celebrate download does show the local time or the time of the communication for the local area.
All right. And we had some evidence presented yesterday as to some text messages that were found in the phone associated with Mr. Parham Did you get a chance to review those records?
I have looked at those records.
All right. And did those accurately reflect the correct time?
They did.
And actually, just to specify, just a second, let me make sure you see the actual exhibit. So this is people's 38 that's been admitted. Are those the cell phone messages that you reviewed?
Yes, this is from the cellular download. It is for the phone number we spoke about here that ends in 4365. And it is, they are in local time, UTC -5.
All right, thank you. And then, so go on, Detective. So then you also received certification documents with the records?
Yeah, so the next thing I look for, again, when I'm assisting another agency and I did not obtain the actual records myself, then the next thing I look for is for certification. This is a certification from the cell phone provider. In this case, it is Sprint. So this is the actual copy of the Sprint certification letter for this phone number that ends in 4365. And what Sprint does is not only do they list the actual phone number to show the certifications for that phone number, they also assign a separate Sprint case number. So that is listed here. And then what I also look at is the bottom left side, you can kind of see highlighted, but there's the executed date of 2/12 of 2018. So that is when Sprint provided the records, but also provided this certification for their records. And then in the highlighted blue area, it just goes on to say that these records are recorded at the original time of the communication. They are either the true originals or copies of the originals. They reflect the communication. They're kept in a normal course of business, and that they check their system, make sure it's working and recording properly.
All right, and then your next slide, there's subscriber information that was included in those records. And could you just discuss what information that you have as far as the subscriber?
Sure. At the top again, it's that same Sprint case number, so it matches the certification. It's the same Saginaw police complaint number listed at the top also. So again, everything matches up. The next part it goes to is it shows that the date range of records requested. So December 1st, 2017 and through December 7th, 2018. Again, the same phone number of the 4365 is listed. So everything lines up or matches up.
And Detective, sorry to interrupt again. So that date range you have, that's a 2-month period. So was there a reason you chose that date range as far as the records?
The date range was provided to me. I didn't write the actual search warrant. These are the records provided, but it gives you and establishes when I look at records, I do my analysis. One of the things we look for is we want to establish a life pattern. Who's the user of the phone? Where's the phone normally used at? Did the usage change? Did the location of the phone change? So you want to establish, instead of just getting a single day's worth of record, we want to be able to get a duration. So in this case, it was over a 2-month duration or more than 60 days worth of records.
And that's enough time you can look at and you can see consistencies and inconsistencies in calls.
Yes, part of that is the amount of usage. So I would say if someone only used their phone once a day, maybe 60 days here would be enough for once a day. But in this case, we had thousands of usage. I could look to see the exact number, but there was over 11,500 communication entries for this phone number over that time period. So that's a very high usage. So there's a very good life pattern established because of the amount of usage over this time period.
All right. And then you indicated there's a phone number there that's associated with the subscriber, correct?
Correct. And it is the phone number that we have listed here, the one that we've associated with Dave and Thompson, which is the one that ends in 4365, the one again that I've been using blue for to show or indicate that's the number we're talking about.
All right. Now, you have an actual name that's associated with these records. And again, as we can see, the phone number is the phone number that's associated with the defendant in this case. But what's the actual name in the subscriber information?
The name listed in the subscriber information is John Doe. I could point it out, but it's in the kind of lower half left side. It says account billing address and has effective date of February 27th, 2016. So that's when this specific Sprint account was obtained or initiated or became effective, but the name listed is John Doe.
All right. And does that mean anything as to who the actual subscriber is, or is it just someone just gave a name?
It's the name that's listed. I can't say if someone gave it. I can't say if the reseller, the authorized Sprint reseller used that name because the person didn't want to give a name, but John Doe is what is listed, and the address listed of the 2319 Weber Street is actually for a party store, a Babel food store, and they run Elite Wireless out of the store. So they are an authorized Sprint reseller. And so their address is listed, and I can only say the name of John Doe is listed for the subscriber.
And that cell phone provider, they won't require like an actual real name or real address. Is that correct?
This is a pay-as-you-go phone, a little different than if you do a postpaid phone. If you went to a Sprint corporate store and say, I want a postpaid phone, in other words, I pay at the end of the month, they're going to require you to do a credit check, use a photo ID, and establish an account. If you're doing a prepaid phone, as in this case here, the store can ask for your name. You don't have to give it. They can put any name down. I've seen names as far, I've seen Mickey Mouse, I've seen Donald Duck, I've seen all kinds of names, but I can't tell you here if someone gave the name of John Doe, said, I don't want to give my name, or the store just put in John Doe, but that's the name listed. And so no name is required to do a prepaid phone like this.
All right. And then, so you have the established date of February 27th, 2016. Then you have effective down at the bottom, you have the active date. What does that mean?
So down at the bottom, there's a couple different things highlighted. It says PTN, which is personal telephone number, and MDN, mobile directory number. So in other words, it shows for this phone number, again, that same phone number that ends in 4365. There's two different entries that we kind of see there. One is highlighted in blue, and then one underneath it is not highlighted. I'll start with the one underneath it first. So that shows a date of September 8th, 2017. So again, if I backtrack a little bit, the phone account was established in February of 2016. So in September of 2017, there shows a change status of active. Typically, when you see that in the Sprint records, and if we went further down in subscriber information, we'd probably see, but usually that means there was some kind of handset change, or someone acquired a new phone for the account. They got rid of their old phone. The old phone broke, or the battery didn't work anymore, but that shows an active. In other words, there's some kind of change to the account. The next thing that is highlighted shows for the date of January 27th, 2018. The time listed is 12:47 p.m. And it shows a status of C. C means canceled in the Sprint subscriber information. So what that says is that this account, this phone number, was canceled on January 27th, 2018 at 1:47 p.m. But again, remember, Sprint is located in Kansas City, Missouri, or they were at that time. And so that was logged in Central Time. So to add an hour to it to show our local or real time, it was actually canceled at 1:47 p.m., our local time, Eastern Michigan here.
And Detective, I'm going to ask you a little bit more questions about canceling the phone. But before I do that, there's an active date just above that section you're talking about. And it's listed as January 28th, 2018. What does that mean?
Yeah, so again, actually to the left of that, it says account contact numbers, and it says phone, and it lists all zeros. So again, if someone was to go in and cancel a phone or call and cancel the phone to Sprint, one of the things they always ask is, hey, do we have a related to your account? You want to list your home number, a different cell phone number. And again, that is just showing that there is a change on January 28th, 2018, but no phone number was listed, no name change, no address change was listed or anything. So either that wasn't, the person did not want to provide it, or it wasn't given, or Sprint didn't log it, but nothing is listed there as far as that active date.
Is the change in this case, would that have been canceling the phone?
Well, that is definitely a change, because that is the date that this number was canceled by someone to Sprint.
All right. But we have underneath there, we have the cancellation date is January 27th, 2018. And then we have the time as 12:47:13 Central Time. Just if you could differentiate between that date and time and then the active date.
Correct. So the January 27th, 2018 is the date that the actual number was canceled. When you call in to cancel your phone, or someone calls in to cancel a phone, and Sprint puts it in their system for the phone to be canceled, it doesn't instantly shut off. It doesn't instantly go off. And in fact, in a lot of cases, in fact, in this case, the phone actually still will have signal for a brief period of time, and sometimes rolls over into the next day before the system goes through and shuts down service to that number. And that's what the actual difference of the 27th, when the phone was called to be canceled, but actually can still have some connection, whether it's on the voice side, data side, sometimes for a longer period of time. They don't instantly flip a switch and it's just not instantly shut off. There's hundreds or thousands of phones a day that they're activating and deactivating. So it takes time to go through their network or through their system to actually cancel or shut down the actual number, so it doesn't have access to their network anymore.
So it would have shut down to what you're saying on January 28th. Is that what would have been going on?
It was called in to terminate or cancel at the 12:47 Central Time, which is 1:47 Eastern Time. And I believe, again, looking at these records, and I believe when I talked to this Sprint analyst, that actually I specifically asked a question why there were still communications shown on the records afterwards. And it was because, again, the phone doesn't immediately shut off. And I believe this phone still had limited or somewhat service as far as available on the network until after midnight on the 27th, which rolled into the 28th of January.
All right. Now, as far as this phone receiving calls or making calls, can you say something as far as when that would have stopped after the person actually cancels the phone?
Yeah, let me refer to my report so I make sure I have the dates and specific times and stuff. So I show the last outbound communication was a text message on this phone number, and that was on January 27th, 2018. And that last outbound text communication was at 1:34 p.m., our local time zone. I show that the last cell site connection, in other words, the last time that phone utilized the cellular network, was an inbound voice call, and that was at 1:27 p.m. on January 27, 2018. So in other words, right around the 1:30 time period on January 27, 2018, there was a text message just after that, and then that was outgoing. So I mean, someone manipulated the keypad. Just prior to 1:30, there was an inbound voice call where that phone utilized the Sprint cellular network and connected up with the cell site. But then after that, all the communications were all incoming, and they are all either routed to voicemail or they were incoming text, but there was no additional outgoing communications from that device, making any communications again by a user of that actual handset.
Okay, and that's as of what time?
The last outgoing, in other words, the last time someone would have shown to have manipulated the keypad, in other words, to send a communication, was a text message at 1:34 p.m. and that was on January 27, 2018. So approximately 13 minutes before Sprint received the phone call to cancel that number.
Okay, so now once the phone is canceled, at some point after that, somebody calls the phone. What's going to happen? What is the person calling the phone? What are they going to hear?
Again, it depends on how quickly Sprint's network shuts down or terminates that number. They might just, and some other factors are in there. If the phone is on or off, if the phone no longer has power or not connected to network, it could just go straight to a voicemail if there was a voicemail set up on this phone. If there wasn't, it might just say that phone's no longer in service. If you send a text message, you're not going to know if that text message didn't go anywhere. In other words, wasn't received. You sent a text message to a number that used to be valid. Now it's just going to go, and Sprint's going to log or going to show those inbound communications. But again, there was no more outbound communications. There was no more connection to the Sprint network from that phone number.
All right. Now, getting into canceling the phone. So can you just go over how someone can cancel the phone?
So at this time for Sprint, and I did again speak to a Sprint analyst, reference this specific case, but also just because of other cases that I've done. To cancel a phone, you have to have some account information. For instance, I could not just call and cancel the prosecutor's phone number because I want to play a trick on him and say, hey, I'm going to cancel your phone. Sprint's going to ask for specific account information, whether it's a name, account, whether it's a password, whether it's a PIN number. but you have to be able to provide account information. Otherwise, anyone could cancel anyone's phone number. So can't say specifically what information was given, but enough of the account information or the right information that the Sprint customer service person who received this call went ahead and canceled this phone on January 27th, 2018. And again, that was at 1:47 p.m. our time.
All right. And then detective, if you can move on to the next slide. And if you can tell the jury what you did here as far as your investigation.
The last thing we talked about was the Sprint subscriber information. Again, we look for the subscriber information to see if there's relationship to people involved in the case, but don't solely rely on the subscriber information because I'm more concerned with who the user of the phone is, not who the subscriber is. I always give the example, my cell phone that I carry with me, state of Michigan, who owns that phone, that's who the subscriber is. It's provided to me to use for work, but I'm the user of the phone. I make the phone calls, I receive the phone calls. So we look for who we do, or I do specifically, is through my analysis and investigation is see using open sources, the internet and paid sources that law enforcement has, the credit bureaus. Is there any name associated with that phone number? Can I find a name associated with that phone number during the specific time period that we're looking for or looking at these records?
All right. And then going on to the next, staying with that. And so in this particular case, searching those TOL records, you found that that one person who's associated with the phone, Brandon Pennywell, is that correct?
Correct. It was listed as a person associated with the phone. And again, its first association was back in November of 2016, Saginaw address. So again, that through the investigation, through the information from the detectives, that this is a known person that's associated with his phone and associated to other parties in this case.
All right. And then it says to August 2nd, 2019. And as the jury's heard, Mr. Brandon Pennywell did die in 2017. So just because someone's deceased, those records could still be coming in as far as associating Mr. Pennywell with the phone.
Correct. It's oftentimes that a phone will still be associated with a person even after you stop using it. If you, again, credit bureaus in different places that obtain all of our information and they sell it to other third parties, you use that phone number, whether it's for medical records, to get a hotel, to rent a car, whether it's ordering a pizza, wherever you use that phone number, different companies will sell it to make money. And then, so that phone has been associated. Again, it started in 2016, but it does so in association all the way through 2019. Obviously, he was deceased for a year and a half or so prior to this. So it's just associated with Brandon Pennywell.
All right. And then if somebody new is using the phone after that particular person passes away or stops using it, is it necessarily going to be reflected in the TLO records that somebody else is associated with that phone?
Not always. Again, if someone just started using a phone, if you're only using a phone for a short duration, or you don't use this phone number for, again, to get your utilities in, to when you whatever different places they gather information from, whether it's the city or the county, if you got to pay taxes or your property tax, or if you're on a donor list or with the hospital, whoever all these different companies that they buy these numbers from, if you don't ever use that number or provide that number, it might not be associated with you. Or if you've only had it for a short period of time. Again, when we talked about this phone was originally activated in, what we say, February 2016, well, the first association with Pennywell wasn't until November of 2016. So if Pennywell was the first person to get his phone back in February, it took 9 months before TLO associated it with him. So sometimes it can take a duration or a time period for a phone to be associated specifically with a name.
Okay. So that would be reasonable in this case. Davion Thompson got the phone in November, for instance, of 2017, and then he had it until January 27th of the next year. So just a few months. It would be reasonable that his name wouldn't be associated with the phone. And none of those things that you talked about, paying bills or whatnot, none of those things happen.
Correct. That's not uncommon.
Now, over to the next slide. If you could discuss with the jury your investigation with respect to, I guess it looks like the cell phones that this phone was using the most in the period you looked at the records.
Correct. When I analyze a case, again, there's certain steps I go through. I have a pattern that I go through. Look for the certification, look for the subscriber information, look for the use pattern. Where's this phone used at the most? So the next step that I do is I look at the different sets of records that we have. In this case, we have the call detail records and we have the LTE records. This slide represents the call detail records. And this represents which cell sites, or again, which cell towers were utilized the most over the duration of the records. Again, going from December 1st, 2017 to the end of these records that we have, which was February 7th to 8th, 2018. What I want to make sure I'm clear on is those circles do not represent coverage of a cell tower or cell site. What happens is a cell site is in the center of each of those circles. The size of the circle represents the amount of usage that cell site or cell tower was used. Same with that bar graph on the lower left side. You can see the very first, the number one cell site or most utilized cell site is a much taller bar graph, just like that circle is a much bigger circle. They represent the same thing. That cell site was utilized by far the most over that 2-month period, more than any other cell site. In fact, it was utilized more than 7-to-1 to the next most frequently used cell site.
Okay, and just to simplify it, each of these cell towers, that number associated with it, that represents basically calls that were made, like as opposed to not text messages, not data, and the CDR data.
And CDRs is for voice calls only. So it represents the number of times that on voice calls, the phone using this number utilized that cell site for service.
All right, and then the cell site you have with the most data is 1851. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, and then you have written on top of that Thompson's address, 4781 South Washington Road. Correct?
There is the orange push pin, and at the bottom of the push pin would represent that address. Correct.
All right. So what's the relationship between that address and that 1851, which represents looks like the bulk of his call data?
That cell site is by far the closest cell site. More importantly, as we go through the next couple of slides, we're actually going to break it down and look at which side or which sector was utilized to complete those calls. And by far, way more than anything else, the side or sector that has an azimuth or has directional antennas pointed towards that address was utilized much more than any of the other two sides of that cell site.
Okay, and then continue on and discuss that.
Again, this was just to kind of really go back and kind of show back up those orange circles where the cell sites are in relationship to the city, to the scenes, to the different addresses. You know, going back to the circles, just kind of give a different visual representation. But this is the breakdown here. So it might be kind of hard to see, but there's a yellow arrow. That yellow arrow in the center of the circle is pointing straight left, or it would be due west. That would also be at the 270 degrees on a compass, if you know a compass dial, that is provided by the cell phone company, or in other words, to say it's pointing at 9 o'clock on a clock face. So that azimuth for sector 3, that is the direction that directional antenna is aimed. And so this is a little more of a breakdown. So looking a little closer, that specific sector, that side of the tower, was used 2,672 times of the 2,709 times. So in other words, all but 37 times out of those over 2,700 times it utilized that cell site or that cell tower, it utilized that specific side. So by far the most frequently used sector and cell site. And again, it's the one closest to that associated address on Washington.
So then the distance of that cell tower from the Washington address, and then the number of calls, well, not so much the number of calls, but the distance and relative to other cell towers in the area, would that be consistent with the most calls being made from that Washington address?
I would expect a Sprint cell phone during this time period of January 2018 at or near the area of this 4781 South Washington address to utilize not only that Sprint cell site, but also that same side or that sector that was utilized again, almost 2,700 times during this 2-month time period.
All right. And then your next cell slide, discuss that.
So this is, again, we originally talked about voice calls and on the call detail records. Now we're going to look at the LTE records. Again, it's a different data source because again, this is for internet usage, this is for data. And the other thing about the LTE records is they're a shorter time period. So the LTE records, because there are so many LTE records, so much data for Sprint to store, maintain, they keep them from a much shorter time period. So they had the records only back to January 20th, 2018 through January 28th, 2018. So, but during this time period, another type of technology, another type of records, as I said earlier, I look at all the different records provided. So this is to break down and say what cell sites on the LTE side during these available records were utilized. And again, that same cell site, so they coexist at the same location. There's multiple transmitters and technology on that specific tower. That same location was utilized more than any other cell site for the LTE records. And it's about a 3-to-1 multiplier from the number 1 compared to the next most frequently used, the number 2. And then I also did the exact same breakdown where then I looked at, well, which side of the cell site was used, which side of that tower, which sector was used. And in this case, it's literally the same as what we saw earlier, that sector 3, that one that points at 9 o'clock on a clock face or 270 degrees on a compass dial, the one that points in the general direction of the South Washington address was utilized by far. It was 2,186 of the 2,192. So again, all but 6 utilize that specific side or sector of that cell site or that cell tower.
And so again, detective, in this case, we're talking about LTE data or LTE records as opposed to CDR records. And again, this would be LTE, would be texting, data, internet, data, that type of.
I just want to clarify, not necessarily always texting, because texting are on a call detail records and don't sell sites. So make sure we're clear. It's for internet and data usage is what it would be. Looking up something on Google, looking up YouTube videos, getting email, getting something from the Weather Channel, data usage for that. I don't want to specifically say texting because texting are listed on the call detail records. They just don't show what cell site was utilized for that.
My apologies. So, but basically the CDR records and the LTE records are both basically giving you the same thing as far as the location of the tower that's used the majority of the time.
Very consistent with each other, that the cell site and more importantly the sector that was utilized by far the most on both types of technology was the one that I would expect someone at or near the Washington Road address to access if they're on the Sprint network during this time period.
All right. Now, did you look at the calls made to and from the cell phone associated with the defendant and do some analysis with respect to that?
I did. So the next thing after looking at where the phone is utilized or used, then who does the phone communicate with? In other words, it helps shows the life patterns. Does someone text more? Do they call more? Who do they text and call the most? What times of day do they call and text the most? So in this case, this is typically, it actually says the top 10, but if you actually look, that second number listed, I have a red line through it. And if you look closely, the number listed there is 000 000 0901. That's not an actual true or phone number that any of us would actually call. That's an internal switching number at Sprint when you are to call a Sprint customer, and then the phone call rolls into a voicemail. See it all the time. So you can see it's currently listed in the number 2 position or the number 2 most frequently used. But rather than throw that out or not show it, I want to make sure, again, we show all the phone numbers that are associated or listed on the records, but that truly is not a number that you call or would call you. That's just an internal switching number. So in reality, this list right here would be the top 9 or the 9 most frequently communicated with numbers.
All right. And then moving on from that, you looked at call communications on January 27th, 2018, which as the jury has learned, that's the date of the homicide.
Correct. So going back to my analysis and looking at call patterns, life patterns, usage patterns, where it's used at, who it calls, the next thing you look at is there a change in pattern or do I see a similar or the same pattern? So a very good example is the user of the phone controls the outgoing communications. I don't control who calls my phone. I control who I dial, who I text, how I use my phone, how I manipulate that keypad. I can't control who calls me. So for instance, if Kathy from Card Services calls to tell me my credit card's bad, that we all get those calls, I can't control that. When the warranty company calls for the car, I can't control it. I control the outgoing usage. I control who I call. So you look at the outgoing communications or the outgoing patterns, both for voice calling and for texting, and see, I have the top 9, and then I have all these other people that have been communicated with in the past. One of the things I look for is, was a phone loaned or utilized by somebody else? So if I was to loan my phone to the detective here or to the prosecutor, they can't control my friends, my family, my boss, my coworkers all calling my phone because they can't control who makes the incoming calls. What either one of them two would do is control the outgoing calls. So I would not expect them to be calling my family, my friends, my boss. It would be a different pattern. I'd see different outgoing communications. They would most likely call their friends, their family, their loved ones, their boss, whoever they're going to normally call, whoever their most frequently communicated people, that's typically who they're going to call or it's going to show up. So look for a change in call pattern. So because January 27th, 2018 is obviously a very important date to this case, it's the date of the incident, I looked at the outgoing communications for this phone number, not the incoming, the outgoing. In other words, the ones controlled by the mobile handset operator, the person operating the phone or making the communication. And so on January 27th, 2018, there were 61 communications. And so this is a breakdown here. There's actually 2 pages. I'll kind of skip up to the next one. That's page 2. We'll talk about page 1 first. And so there's some different colors highlighted here. The brighter, lighter blue, I guess you'd almost say like a baby blue that you see all the way down that left column and across the top. And that is to associate the 4365 number. These are the records we have, the phone associated with Mr. Thompson. The next column, or that second column, is the called number. So in other words, the number that was called from the mobile handset that utilizes phone number. So if you notice the numbers that are in a dark blue, so first talking about the dark blue ones, not the gray blue ones. So there's some on page 1 and some on page 2. The dark blue ones represent those numbers that were in the top 9, those top 9 most frequently communicated with numbers. And in fact, if you look, there's a whole bunch that are to the 6501 number. 6501 was the most frequently communicated with number over the duration of the 2-month period. And that number does show up here. But then more importantly, as we go through here, all the numbers that are in gray blue, the grayish blue color, which are all the other numbers here just about, those are numbers that have been called prior to or previous to this date. In other words, they didn't just show up on January 27th. In other words, it didn't appear a brand new person was using the phone. It's numbers that have been called historically over the duration of the 2 months. Then the other color listed here is the green number. Now, if you remember much earlier when I showed the 3 different numbers, the green number is the number that ends in 5011. That is the one associated with the victim. That is associated with Antonio Parham. So you can see that there were communications outgoing to that phone number on January 27th, 2018. And then as we go through, the records, there's only one spot, as you see here on page 2, that is white. In other words, I didn't color it in. That number is the only new number that appears or actually shows up on these records for the very first time as an outgoing communication. It's only one number. It only shows up one time, but it's bracketed by other numbers that are called numerous other times. I did do a little additional research and I did look up that phone number on the records, and that phone number, and I'll show it in a slide coming up here, actually shows up about 7 hours earlier as an incoming call. I don't remember the specific time. I have it listed though. I think it was at 3 something in the morning. And then this was a callback to that number about 7 hours later. So not surprising, one new number, but there's not a plethora or a whole bunch of new numbers. It's the same numbers that were called previously and also the same numbers that are called often.
Okay, so just to kind of review that a bit. So we're talking about the cell phone records of the phone number that's associated with Davion Thompson, the defendant in this case, correct?
Yes.
And they're all, this is a particular call log for the date of January 27th, 2018. That's the day of the homicide, correct?
Yes, just a breakout of just this specific day and just outgoing calls for this day.
All right. And then every single call, except for one on this particular day, was either made or received from a number that phone had either received or made a call to on days prior in the records that you received.
I want to clarify that and actually correct that. Not received. I didn't look at the number called previously. I was actually looking at, was that number called previously? In other words, was there an outgoing communication previously? So every number here had been called by this phone number, by this mobile handset previously, except for one.
My mistake. So these are all outgoing calls, which we look at because, again, we can't control who calls us. We can only control who calls somebody else.
That's correct.
All right. And then a number of these calls were to people that were in your top 9 frequently called numbers to this phone, from this phone. So that those, again, would be people that whoever's operating that phone is calling on a regular basis.
Correct. Again, I broke it down to the top 9. I didn't go through and say this one's number 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or 15, which these very well, these ones in the gray could be, but just again, focusing on the top 9 most frequently communicated with numbers. Yes.
Okay. And then, and I guess just to inquire, is there an opinion or something you can conclude from that?
Looking over the duration of the records, again, starting on December 1st, 2017, all the way up through this date, the date prior, and looking at the usage pattern, location pattern, the call pattern, specifically talking about outgoing communications, in my opinion, the same person was operating the phone on January 27th that was utilizing or using the phone the previous almost 2-month period.
All right. So on December 1st, it's consistent with the same person using the phone on December 1st as January 27th, 2018.
When I look over the entire pattern, if I only had December 1st, I couldn't make that opinion. But looking over the entire pattern, looking at the amount of calls per day, I think the smallest amount of communication entries on a day was like 50 something on one specific day. Other than that, there was, sometimes hundreds of calls. So the amount of usage for this device, this specific number, and over the duration of records that we have, the pattern indicates to me, in my opinion, that the same person was using it over the entire duration that was using it also on this specific day.
All right. And then if we move on to January 26th, 2018, so you did the same analysis?
I did. I broke that day down specifically just to look at outgoing communications for January 26, 2018. And so on this day, there was 73 outgoing communications. So it's over 3 pages here that I'm showing you. Again, I did the exact same analysis where I looked at outgoing communications only. I looked at the numbers that was texted or voice called and looked to see are those numbers that are normally used or normally communicated with, or was it a number that was previously had an outgoing communication, and over the 73 communications listed over the day. And the first one, again, I should mention, started at 10:07 a.m. on the 26th. But from 10:07 a.m., that was the first outgoing communication on January 26, 2018. They indicated, in my opinion, the same person was utilizing the phone to make the outgoing communications that had previously used it the prior almost 2-month period, and then also the day after.
So again, so on January 26th, all the numbers called from that phone were numbers that had previously been called from that phone.
Correct.
And that would be consistent, again, with that person who was using the phone on January 26th, having been the same person who was using the cell phone over that duration of the records that you looked at.
Correct.
And then moving on to that, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Not to that. This next slide actually just does that breakdown of that one number that did show up at that phone call on the 27th, where it was the outgoing call at 10:34 a.m. This just shows that when I did further research or look through the records, that same phone number did have an incoming call or made an incoming call for the first time at 3:44 a.m. So there was an incoming voice call, again, about 7 hours earlier before that first outgoing call to that number. Again, I don't find that unusual because, again, it was only one individual outgoing call that was unique or new compared to the previous 2 months, but it was bracketed by numerous other numbers that have been called numerous other times, and also numbers that were, again, in the top 9.
All right. And then moving on from that, you looked at some other phone records that were with the number related to Lisa Curtis.
Correct. Again, I showed you that number earlier that we gave, that was highlighted in yellow. So phone number associated with Lisa Curtis that ends in 7663. And using, again, analytical software tool that I help analyze records, but also create the maps to make it a little easier than doing everything purely by hand. When I compared, or in other words, did a search for Lisa Curtis's associated number to the records associated with Davy and Thompson, it showed that there was 55 communication entries for this case. Again, my case number is listed there, and the Saginaw Police Department case number is also listed. So just again, a quick way to see whether communications between these two numbers, and this does indicate or show there was communications between these two numbers during the time period of the records we had from December 1st through that February 8th date.
And then moving on from that, your next slide.
So again, I had 3 phone numbers associated with this case. So this gets into the next phone number where I don't have the actual records for the phone number. That's the victim, Antonio Parham. But his number, again, if you recall earlier, I listed in green. So that's what's shown up in green here. And then the number in that bright baby blue, again, is the Sprint phone number that ends in 4365 associated with Mr. Thompson. And so this is a breakdown of the communication entries on those Sprint records associated with Mr. Thompson with communications with the victim's phone. So there was 49 total communication entries over that roughly 2-month time period. Looking at the breakdown of that, 48 of those were text messages. 1 was a voice call. And so there's actually a column that says time correction. So you'll actually see that it's in yellow once we get down towards the bottom. And when I go to the next slide, this is page 2 of it. So all the ones in yellow, again, I don't want to confuse you and say they're associated with Lisa Curtis, but this is just to break out and show that this is the time correction where we had to do the time correction because they were text messages and Sprint kept them in central time during this time period. So we had to do an adjustment by 1 hour.
All right. And then again, these are communications that are between the phone associated with the defendant and the phone associated with the victim. Did you get a chance to analyze what is in People's 38 and compare it to this data from the cell phone records?
Yes, I've looked at this Celebrate extraction. There's a couple different Celebrate extractions that I've looked at, this one specific, but looking at the communications, they start on January 21st, 2018. There's a bunch on the 21st and then the 22nd. And then there's a skip to the 27th. The text message, these are called detail from Sprint, showing the communication. It lists the date, the time, who texted who. So it shows both phone numbers. They correspond, or they are corroborated or confirmed by the Celebrate extraction report. So we kind of have 2 separate independent sources here. Sprint records, and then we have Celebrate extraction from the victim's phone. So 2 separate sources, and they both match up with each other and they show the same thing, other than we have to do the time adjustment here. But other than that, the text messages listed by Sprint are also in the victim's phone, and the victim's phone actually would then show the actual verbiage or what was actually texted, the actual messages, but they do match up. They do correspond with each other.
All right. And in those phone records from Sprint, it appears there's one voice communication. That's 11:06:05. It says duration 0. Does that mean that? How would you interpret that?
So that is in that. Just to clarify, that was January 21st, 2018 for that time at 11:06:05.
Correct.
It shows a voice call and shows a duration of 0 seconds. So in other words, what it indicates is that was a outbound communication. So the phone associated with Thompson was an outbound communication. In other words, a voice call to talk, but it was a duration of 0. So either it was quickly hung up before it went through to the other party, or it maybe got disconnected, but the duration listed by Sprint was 0 seconds. Typically for a voice call, you're gonna see a duration for the amount of air time that you utilize or used. Here it shows 0. So it does not appear that they actually verbally spoke on that phone call, but it does show on the Sprint records that an attempted phone call was at least made, or a phone call was made, whether it just was an accident instead of texting, someone accidentally dialed it, or if it just, they hung up, or just the network, they couldn't get a connection, but it was zero duration.
All right. And then all the other records other than that one are all text records. Is that correct?
Yes, the other 48 are text messages.
All right. And then moving on from that, you have an animation of
Correct. So
how the cell phone towers connect with the phone.
correct. Again, this is again for the date of the incident. So it's January 27th, 2018. And this is the incident information I received occurred sometime around 12:30 p.m. So this is just bracketing basically an hour and a half on either side of the incident of the homicide, of looking from 11 a.m. an hour and a half before up to 2 p.m. an hour and a half after. And what type of cell site connections did the phone associated with Mr. Thompson have? In other words, was the phone, does it appear to be moving? Does it appear to be going to different areas? Does it appear that it utilized cell sites near the location of the homicide? So this is a 3-hour window. Now, if we were to sit here and do this over the real time hours, and that would not be good for any of us. So what we're able to do through my analytical software program, I'm able to make an animation and I'm able to speed that time up. In other words, I can make a time period, condense it down, but still show visually what occurred during that time period. So on the lower right-hand side, there's a thing called a date time slider bar. So I've set it so that 1 second of time that we are watching right now will equate to 5 minutes of real time back then. So in other words, for every 20 seconds, that's about an hour time period. So this is roughly about a 1 minute animation that covers a 3-hour period. So just kind of to try to speed things up. So this is just an animation showing all the different cell site connections, both for the on the CDRs, they're called detail records for voice calls, but also for the LTE. So and I don't know if I can play it from the this mode. I apologize. I'm going to have to go to the other mode to actually show it, or I can show it from the actual animation. So this is the animation right here. I'll hit the play button.
In just a second,
Sure.
Detective. Okay, it's up now.
Is it playing now? Okay. So I'm going to hit play. It does not appear to be playing well up there, does it? Try it one more time here. Okay, it's playing on my end now. Okay, so up here on the right side is the time date slider bar that is slowly moving down. And again, the orange circles are cell sites. So I'm going to speak through this first time and we can go back through it. These are representing what cell sites were utilized or accessed. So again, we went from this area up to the area of the homicide. And then as we get past near 1 o'clock p.m., we're going to have cell site connections near Camelot Place Apartments. And then the cell site connection is going to start moving or showing indication of the phone movement. And then again, it stops there at 2 p.m. So again, we can go through it if you want a little slower, talk about specific points, but the indication is it shows initially the cell site that was utilized by the phone associated with Mr. Thompson is that same cell site that we spoke about, the closest cell site to his associated address. It's also to the same side or sector associated address. So starting just, from 11 a.m. to roughly just after 12 p.m., that cell site is utilized. And then after that, we start seeing different cell sites start being utilized, which when you add them together and look at the cumulative effect, it indicates that there is the mobile handset is moving or changing locations as we play through this animation.
Okay, so just kind of summarize the connections are starting at that cell site that's closest to the defendant's residence in your animation.
Correct.
And that's beginning time, I believe, is 11 a.m.
11 a.m. And I believe they go just after noon is when they first start showing indication of utilizing other cell sites and movement.
Okay, and then the connections after noon are moving towards that homicide location, 522 South Bond. Is that correct?
Yes, they move in a west-northwest direction.
All right, and then around 12:20, 12:30, around that period of time, the cell phone connections are they in the area of 522 South Bond?
So during the time period of 1220, and I actually have a still map to show that from 1220 to 1245, all cell site connections, there was over 25 of them, utilized those two cell sites that we talked about earlier, which was 1821 and 1832, which are the two closest Sprint cell sites to the homicide scene. But more importantly, they also only utilize the side or the sector that has avenues pointing, towards or in the general direction of the actual scene. So again, over that 25-minute time period, starting at 1220, going up to 1245, exclusively those two cell sites, and more importantly, only in those two sectors were utilized by this phone to make and receive communications and for data on the Sprint network.
All right. And thereafter, the communications move over towards cell towers in the direction of the Camelot apartments. Is that correct?
Correct. From 1:03 p.m. to 1:13 p.m. And again, this is all on January 27, 2018. But from that 10-minute period, there were 8 cell site connections for this phone number, and they connected to the cell site by Sprint that is closest to Camelot Place apartment, also to the side or the sector that has an azimuth pointing towards Camelot Place apartment. And I just noted here in my report that it's approximately 1,000 feet away. So very, very close. And again, I would expect a phone that is at or near Camelot Place apartment that was on the Sprint network during this time period to utilize that Sprint cell site and that side or that sector.
Okay. And then from where, or from there, where do the connections move to after they move away from Camelot?
It kind of moves in a kind of a east and north direction up towards the center of the city.
Okay. And what time do they stop? Does it stop moving?
This animation was just, again, that bracketed time period from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. So an hour and a half on either side of the homicide.
Okay. And now, so in this situation, as you discussed before, phone was shut off. The account was, the phone was shut off about 12, was it 12:47, 1:47?
Well, it was canceled at 12:47 Central Time, but in Eastern Time or our time zone, it was 1:47. So again, this animation only went to 2 p.m. because, the phone was canceled again at 1:47.
All right, so 1:47. So now, after it's canceled, is it possible for you to still be getting data as far as connections with cell towers?
Well, there's a yes and a no there. Again, because Sprint doesn't instantly shut down the phone. They put it in their system, in their queue for it to terminate or shut down. There still can be connections. But once a phone is terminated, once it is canceled, we as law enforcement are no longer able to track or to obtain its location.
All right, and then moving on from the animation, you indicated that you had some slides reflecting the towers that were connecting with the phone between 12:20 and 12:45.
I want to make sure we can get back to animation mode before we proceed. Okay.
Right.
So this is that specific time period that we spoke about, that 25-minute time period of 12:20 to 12:45, where I said there was 25 connections to 2 specific cell sites. That again is, this map is just to show that these are the 2 closest Sprint cell sites. These are also cell sites I would expect a Sprint phone to connect with. It was at or near that area of the homicide scene during this time period. So this again is to give the visual representation of how far away. So when I show that it's 0.9 miles or 1.57 miles, that is straight line distance from the cell site or the cell tower to the actual scene location. Obviously, we as people have to take streets and follow the roads, but just the straight line distance is what's listed there.
Okay. And then this slide reflects what's going on between 12:20 and 12:45.
Correct. So these are the specific breakdowns, again, showing everything we just talked about, the 25 connections during that 25-minute period. We're only to 2 cell sites and 2 connections. And then we kind of get a little more breakdown. So what I looked at first was, I'm just going to look at call detail records and look at voice calls. So during this time period, and in this time period, what we're talking about is this 25-minute time period of 12:20, 12:45, there were 2 voice calls. The first voice call was listed here at 12:32, And so if you see the lower left, that yellow arrow pointing up, that represents the azimuth. And then there's those two yellow lines that represent the sector boundary. That was the cell site. Again, that's the closest cell site to the scene. That was one utilized for that phone call. So again, that phone call was at 12:32. Approximately 2 minutes later at 12:34 was another phone call. So again, a voice call. And that utilized the other cell site that we just spoke about, the 1832 and the sector 3. Again, the second closest Sprint cell site and also the sector that provides coverage. So just looking at voice calls, so that's two of the connections. But more importantly, when we get into the LTE and we start looking at the data connections, there was a total of 26 entries on the LTE records for communications. 23 of them actually list which cell site was utilized. 3 of them listed in red. Sprint didn't capture or didn't show what the cell site was utilized. So we have 23 LTE connections during the same 25-minute time period. So what's important to notate here is that 19 of the 23, so all but 4, utilize that closest Sprint cell site, the one that we've talked about, that's just less than a mile away, 1821, Sprint cell site 1821, sector 1. It utilized that for 19 of those. But there was 4 that utilize that other Sprint cell site that is slightly further away, just over 1.5 miles away, but again, has an outer point towards the scene. But what's interesting and unique, if you look at the yellow arrows on the left side, that's what we call the call tree there, is that those 4 connections are actually bracketed by the other 19 that utilize yellow ones. So in other words, we were articulating or bouncing back and forth. So if you look at the phone calls, 2 minutes apart, one utilized one cell site, then it used the other one. These LTE records are going back and forth, utilizing one cell site and utilizing the other cell site and utilizing the other cell site. And if you actually look, 2 of the LTE connections, the first 2 listed, one at 12:20 and 11 seconds, utilized that cell site 1821, but another connection at the exact same time utilized this cell site, which is the 1832. So literally at the same time, because of data, they're utilizing the 2 different cell sites. And again, I would expect a phone at or near the incident scene to have similar connections on the Sprint network during this time.
All right. And then you did a similar analysis with respect to Ms. Curtis's records, correct?
I did. The next slide here is the certification. I look for the same thing, certification related to this case, to this number.
And that's the phone number associated with Ms. Curtis?
Sorry, yeah. So the phone number associated with Ms. Curtis is this Sprint 989-714-7663. And this certification letter is for that specific phone number. And again, Sprint provides a certification saying it's for this number and it's for the period of records that we receive from them.
All right. And then the next page just indicates, again, the subscriber's information.
Correct. Again, this is right from Sprint. This is the same case number, the same phone number, the Sprint internal case number besides the Saginaw Police Department number. And then again, it shows the same time period of records were asked for, roughly December 1st through February 2nd. But down in the yellow listed, it says the account billing address, the effective date for the account, the date that it was established was September 27th, 2015. And the name listed is Lisa Curtis and a Saginaw address.
All right. And then after that, you analyzed or looked at her calls between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., correct?
Correct. Again, and I want to say specifically on January 27th, 2018. So the homicide date, I looked at her specific records and broke it down for that specific date. Again, bracketing before the incident and after the incident. So just looking at a time period of 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on January 27th, 2018. So the next slide shows her total phone calls, or the phone calls that she had on this date. And the one highlighted in yellow represents the closest call to the homicide or incident time. Again, I was given a time of approximately 12:30. So that call highlighted there was at 12:19. So prior to that 12:19 call, the next closest call was just before noon. So it was kind of back at 11:58, or after the 12:19. The first communication on her records after the incident time wasn't until 1:11 or 13:11 hours. So that's just the reason the ones highlighted is show that's the closest communication near the time of the incident I was given.
All right. And then after that, you're looking at the LTE records.
Correct.
Ms. Curtis's phone.
Same time period, 11 a.m. to 2 or 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. of January 27th, 2018. And so there was 4 pages, again, LTE, much more communication entries retained by Sprint. That's why they only keep them for a short period of time. So we actually have 4 pages listed here. And just highlighted in yellow again is bracketing the time period nearest to the incident. So starting at 12:08. So in other words, the first communication after 12 noon, and then highlighted all the way up until 12:29 was the last communication before the incident time. And then there's not another one until 1:05. So that's why those ones are highlighted, because those are what are going to be visually represented on the map that I have coming up here.
And so with respect to all that data, then your next slide, the map, all that data will basically show how, will go into you being able to determine how her phone moves and as far as the connections with the cell towers.
So during that time period that we're specifically talking about, so from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., she utilized only 2 cell sites or 2 cell towers. On each cell site or each cell tower, she utilized 2 sides or 2 sectors is the proper name. And so that's what's visually represented here. I have the crime scene address listed in the red push pin, kind of on the left center of the map. And then there's another address listed with an orange push pin, and it's also in yellow writing. And that is the address or location of King Communication. That was an address provided for me as a location or an area where it was advised that the phone or Lisa Curtis, was at during this time period. And so looking at the records and looking at the time period here, numerous connections and majority of connections are to the 2 sectors and to the 2 cell sites that I would expect someone at or near the area of King Communication to have connections with. But more importantly, she had no communications with the sector that would provide an azimuth point towards the crime scene or to the closest Sprint cell site to the crime scene.
All right. And then these records, your analysis, that would be consistent with Ms. Curtis being at work during this period of time, correct?
I was given her work location at King Communication. Again, I would expect someone to being at or near King Communication have similar connections with the cell site and the sectors that she had the numerous connections with during this time period.
All right. And then just going back to your analysis of the cell phone that's associated with the defendant, basically you're summarizing your findings there. That puts the defendant, the phone associated with the defendant in the area of where the homicide was during the time of the homicide. Are your findings consistent with that?
So the way I would word it is, my opinion is, I would expect a phone at or near the homicide scene to have similar connections to the same 2 Sprint cell sites and the same 2 sectors as the defendant's phone did.
Okay. And then another conclusion, and feel free to rephrase, but with respect to who was using the phone that's associated with the defendant on January 27th, the same person using it on the 27th was the same person using it for the duration of the records, which goes back to December 1st. Are your findings consistent with that?
Yes.
Now, I believe you testified earlier as far as how many cases you have testified in, or did you?
I think I actually talked about how many cases I do a year and how many sets of phone numbers I do a year. As far as testifying, I've been qualified as an expert here in the state of Michigan, and I think in 9 or 10 different counties, 37 times. I have testified other times where I was not needed to be qualified as an expert, but as far as expert witness testimony, it's been 37 times here in the state of Michigan.
All right. And then you've analyzed cell data in far more cases than that. Would that be correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And so in those instances where you've analyzed cell data, have there been cases where the data is pointed to someone other than the state of Michigan's suspect or the police department suspect as having committed the crime?
Absolutely. I've had numerous cases and some just very recent where a detective called me up and believed they had their suspect, and the cell phone records clearly indicated they were not involved in the case or pointed to a different direction.
Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for lunch at this time. Once again, do not discuss the case among yourselves, nor with anyone else, nor listen to, read, or watch any news reports concerning this case. We'll take a break until 1:30, right?
All right.
Okay, you can stay. Thanks.
May be seated. Record should reflect this time. Anything for the record, Mr. Fedoric?
Your Honor, just to inform the court, I only have one more witness, and that'll be Ms. Graham by video.
All right. Anything for the record, Mr. O'Farrell?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. O'Farrell, do you intend to produce any witness?
About it.
Okay. Would you like to discuss now your client's right to testify while the jury is out?
I think we can do that at this point.
All right.
All remains. Is he too far away from the mic? Your Honor? Yes. Thanks. Mr. Thompson, you understand that you have a right to testify, and you also have a right to remain silent as a defendant in the case. Correct?
Yes.
And you understand that if you chose to remain silent, there will be an instruction given that they should not consider that in any way with regard to your guilt or innocence. You understand that this is your right to testify or not testify. You make that decision.
Yes.
You and I have discussed it, and in fact, we've had 2 prior trials in this case, so we're pretty familiar with the concept. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
I understand or go into detail, but my discussions with you, we discussed the strategy of testifying or not testifying, and I've given you my view of that. Is that correct?
Correct.
You understand it's your choice. At this time, have you made a decision about whether you testify or not?
Yes. I'd like to. All right. All right. Anything else, Mr. O'Farrell?
Your Honor, perhaps the only witness I would be considering would be perhaps recalling Detective 5 questions.
Okay. All right. And both counsel have had a chance to look at proposed jury instructions. We won't get to those today in terms of sending them to the jury. What you've seen so far, I'm just trying to clarify all this now. Mr. Fedoric, any additions, deletions, objections, or corrections?
So given the testimony from Gail Rousseau, I think we'll have to change the designation of his expertise because it indicated the gun. The gunpowder residue. So I can't remember what the designation was that we agreed on, something about distance determination. But at any rate, that's the only thing. Otherwise, I'm satisfied with it.
All right, Mr. O'Farrell.
Your Honor, Alicia and I were discussing the prior inconsistent statement. The modified one, as it's labeled, is the new instruction as it was changed in, I think, 2017. I don't think it says that a statement that's inconsistent can be considered as to credibility. And then it says a statement under oath can be considered both as to credibility and as substantive evidence, to paraphrase. And it's my recollection, Judge, that included in that second category, there's also something to the effect of if the witness acknowledged that they said it, it can also be considered as substantive evidence. In other words, equating it with an oath. And I think that's more in line with what the old instruction was. But Alicia and I were talking about, and that's the only issue I have, Judge, in terms of proposed instructions.
All right, if you want to, or she wants to explore that any further, Mr. O'Farrell, we'll take a look at that.
Okay,
But other than that, there are no other issues with the instructions.
I don't believe so, Judge.
Okay, well, we'll have a chance to look at that before, like I said, we present them to the jury anyhow.
Thank you.